gentlemen, welcome back to another panel for Galaxy's Greatest, the 45th anniversary celebration of 2000 AD, one of the world's greatest comic anthologies. And this is going to be a panel about the history and a discussion around the art styles of 2000 AD from its inception through to modern day. And I am joined by some fantastic artists, panelists, guests, wonderful people who have worked all on 2000 AD. And I'm going to go around the room and you can all say hello before we jump in. I'm going to start with Jake Lynch. How are you doing? You okay?
Not too bad. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, thank you for coming and talking. And just below you is Simon Davis. Simon, how are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, good. I'm not too bad. We're all in a different way. I'm not above.
I'm going to be going. Yeah, it's recording my view, so I'm hoping the viewers will see. Because just over your shoulder is Chris Weston. So, Chris, how are you doing? You good?
Yeah, not bad. Rocking the
looking the t-shirt.
Yeah, for the special occasion.
Representing.
Yeah.
And in the top corner, Stephen Yeowell. Stephen, how are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks very much, mate. Yeah, can't complain.
Excellent. Good. I'm sure we could. We're British. That's all we can do. We're very good at it. Right, I'm going to jump straight in. As I said, this panel is to discuss the art, and I want to go back to those early days of 2000 AD. And first question for everyone, really, we'll go around as well, is how you guys got into it, and what when you were a kid and you were getting into this, what was the art that sort of pulled you in? Were there any artists that sort of influenced you and pulled you in when you were first introduced to 2000 AD? And I'm going to go the opposite way. I'll start with Stephen. What's your experience in, and what pulled you in from an art perspective?
Well, the standout art for me in the first issue of 2000 AD was, I think it was probably, of all things, the Dan Dare that Bellardinelli was drawing. I kind of like that sort of David Bowie-esque Dan Dare he drew. And he always drew these kind of quite bizarre spaceships, which I always liked. I've got a feeling the other stuff, I was thinking about this earlier in the day, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's only Dave Gibbons in the first issue. He's the only British artist in it, isn't he? Mm. Everyone else is Italian or Spanish, which was pretty standard for the 70s in British comics. And it's only with 2000 AD you see more of a sort of influx of British artists back, don't you?
Yes, there's the European influence. Was there a reason? Did everyone know whether there was a reason for that? Was it just sort of they were known? Was it page rates? Or
this is the point I wanted to make, because everyone says that the classic early period of 2000 is obviously your Bolland, McMahon, Kevin O'Neill, Cam Kennedy, but I think there's a forgotten era of 2000 AD that preceded it, when pretty much the comic was entirely drawn by continental European artists. And I actually made a list, and the list just goes on forever. It's like Marcel Canos, Blasquez, Bois, Ramon Solo, Ennio, Trigo, Horatio Lalia, Jose Ferre, Jose Blasco, Jesus Blasco, Redondo, Aspiri. I mean, do you want to stop me? It was more.
No, it's that's a really good point.
Definitely a forgotten period of 2000 AD, because everyone thinks it begins with Bolland and McMahon and Kevin O'Neill, like I said before, but there's a little era that precedes it.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing they were kind of the established canon of artists at IPC at the time, weren't they? And I'm not sure how much of an influence. I know some of them were working through studios, getting work at Fleetway. Was it Fleetway or IPC? The first issue.
IPC, I think the first
IPC.
issue.
Yeah. I don't know if they're working through a studio system, or they had agents.
I think
who had connections with IPC. Is it Doug? What's his name? There's some blanked on his name. But there was a chap at IPC who acted as agent for a lot of these guys.
Oh, okay.
And I've completely blanked on his name.
Barry something?
Barry
Croker.
Might be.
I think it's Barry Croker.
Yeah.
Reaching back into the annals of time. That's really interesting. You make a good point there, because I think it's as a fan perspective. Obviously, you think of those classics. You make a good point. I think of Mike McMahon, Cam Kennedy, Brian Bolland, but I do forget the only sort of international name I suppose I often remember is Carlos Square, because obviously fundamentally linked with Judge Dredd. But that's, you make a very good point. There's almost like a forgotten cadre of artists that, you know, probably worth exploring. I'm going to just store that away for another day for.
But the question is,
me,
why didn't they fire the reader's imagination? Because it wasn't until your Brendan McCarthy's and your Brett Ewins and your Bonds and Kevin Neal's. Well, Kevin Neal was always there because he was the designer. But you know that what's known as the Dave Gibbons, the pantheon of. Hello, I'm in the middle of a podcast. My other studio members turned up, so she's going to put up with this. What was I saying?
Why didn't these artists fire up the imagination? Which is a really good point.
Yeah, why didn't they capture the reader's imaginations the way the British artists did? It's a question I'd like to.
Well, let's throw that out. I'll throw it to so Simon or Jake. Any thoughts on those early differences?
I'm really ignorant, and I'm relatively late to 2000 AD. I think I saw some in my dentist waiting room when I was very young, particularly some of the flesh covers and stuff. But that was about as early as I got, so I have no real knowledge. It's never really stops me talking about anything, but I have no real knowledge.
So exactly the same for me. I mean, just mentioning Bernard Nelly, I suddenly thought, Christ God, he could really do stuff with ink, couldn't he? He was absolutely incredible. But that's about it for me. I came in sort of around the 300s with things like Starborn Thing and Trapper Hag, so Steve Dillon and Azuera. And so that's about where my knowledge really starts. I have dug back, but once again, it's only sticking with people like, you know, the big ones, the ones that hit 2000 AD.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I'm going to go say so. Chris, I think it's just worth thinking about. I think really from opinion, what it's worth is this idea of sort of like, you know, would it be they were studio artists, so were they very much sort of working to a style that was, I don't want to say standard because the content wasn't particularly standard, but it sort of, you know, it wasn't until these other artists came in that they were doing something different. I mean, this is one of the things I want to explore because you do get these sort of more exaggerated artists, you know, Kevin O'Neill's and I've got, who was I thinking, sort of Mike McMahon, you know, Jim McCarthy, those sort of like, those are different where they were exaggerating characters and they become a bit more striking.
I think my own the answer to my own question, I think, is the fact, because I think both from the 60s and into the 70s, Britain was still like in the centre of a pop cultural revolution. You know, obviously starting with the British pop invasion, and right through to glam rock, and we've mentioned Bowie already, and even things like. Don't forget, Star Wars was a big influence on that era. And Star Wars was being made in England. So I think everyone knew someone who was working at Elstree, working on Star Wars. And Doctor Who was running on the TV show. I can't think of, in the 70s, I can't think of any big TV shows elsewhere in the world. Star Trek was long over by then. So I think we were still sort of in the middle of some sort of pop cultural explosion in this country. So
there's the potential that it was found amongst that, you know, the pop culture explosion. I mean, the sci-fi fiction, you're right, because you had things from 6 and 7, everything from Thunderbirds to Blake Seven and Doctor Who and everything in between. So it may have been a pop culture or sort of a cultural thing rather than an artistic thing that was bringing these people in.
Yeah, I mean, those artists that I listed, they're all really great artists, but they just didn't have that creative, imaginative edge that us British artists had. Apart from Bellardinelli, possibly he's the only one who did it, and because of that, he's the one that stuck around out of all those continental artists.
Is it the art though? Or is it the stories they were drawing? Because you think about the early stories in the early 2000 ADs, they're not. I don't know if they're treated with the same reverence that later stories are. I mean, I'm not thinking sort of Mac 1, sort of nostalgia for it, isn't there? Flesh, you know, The Visible Man.
Yeah.
I have a nostalgia for them, but
there aren't many collections of them. I think that's the thing,
No.
isn't it? They're not really collected anyway. So you're probably right. There's this thing of like, so really, it came later than you're thinking that there was when it hit its stride, that the more iconic characters come out. Again, from my experience, I think talking to Jake's point around that 300 mark, you get sort of like, I was introduced to Rogue Trooper and Slain and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think Steve's right. I think it is more the character-led thing to do with why those artists didn't resonate with the readership. I think until things like Slain and Rogue Trooper.
Yeah, but the first 2 episodes of Robo Hunter were drawn by Jose Ferre, and it's not until Ian Gibson completely takes over the strip that it really explodes into life. It just goes bonkers.
But there's that idea of the way the art, you say the character, but the art pops. I mean, Ian Gibson's art is it just pops, doesn't it? It has that sort of very sort of recognizable style, even especially that period. So again, I think maybe it's a combination. Lightning in the Bottle. There's a period where all of a sudden character recognition and art, that idea of, I'll keep using the word punk on the other panel. I want to sort of avoid it a little bit, but that idea of being so edgy, that you said about that edge that the art then brought to them, that was slightly different to everything else that was on the newsstand. I mean, do you think that would have had that's the combination?
I think Kevin O'Neill's designs because he was the art editor, and his design for the comic, which was like nothing we'd ever seen before, probably helped in that respect. It was very sort of brash and in your face in the way that your previous comics like Lion and Valiant weren't. They seem very sedate in comparison.
Certainly, when I was reading, I think the only competition, the thing I was reading at the time, was Look-In. So there was sort of nothing quite like 2000 AD when I saw it. So it's always been sort of like a breed apart, I've always felt.
Yeah, it stands out.
Yeah, I grew up reading Look-In. That was my go-to thing. And, interestingly, there was John Burns and Arthur Ransom, a nice crossover artist to 2000.
I hated Look-In.
Yeah.
Did you?
You did you?
Hated it. It's because
I still see the artwork on eBay, and it's actually really good.
I was wrong.
Yeah,
wrong. But at the time, I think because we didn't watch ITV in our household.
Did you think it was dreadfully common?
Oh yeah. Oh,
I don't think we watched ITV in my house.
Robin's Nest.
Yeah, we've got a
I
younger.
would not buy a comic that had Richard O'Sullivan on the front cover. Come on.
The best TV Dick Turpin there's ever been. What are you talking about?
Iconic, what you're saying. Okay, well, let's move forward in time a little bit then. So really, with those early ones, there's obviously it's the black and white and the use of, but there was, we say it took off in the 80s, and you start to get those sort of the big artists, sort of the ones we recognise as iconic ones. What are the ones then that sort of, I'll say influence you, but stand out really, or you worked with alongside? Try not to sort of show anyone's age, but so during those sort of the mid to late 80s and that sort of thing, I just want to go through it really. Sort of what were your thoughts on that sort of period? Because that's where the big iconic characters are coming through.
I think the iconic characters sort of came through when it merged with Star-Lord, didn't it? Because that's when you got Johnny Alpha, Strong Team Dog, and Roadbusters, and which morphed into ABC Warriors. I think the comic really benefited from that merger.
Yeah, I never saw that whole period, to be honest with you. I kind of saw the early ones, and then I started picking 2000 AD up again, as Jake did around the sort of 300s with Rogue Trooper starting and the Bolland Dark Judge's story in Dread.
I missed that.
Mm.
Oh, I missed that. I wish that's one of those things I really wish I'd got at the time, because that would have just blown my mind. Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
It was mind blowing.
Yeah. And that is the thing. You didn't see anything like that anywhere else. And I don't know if it was the attitude or the artists or the writers or whatever. It was just absolutely revolutionary, and all these different styles that they had sort of going off. They all brought something, and it's just a melting pot. And that's why, and it continues to be, You think of all the different styles that have come out of 2000 AD still today. I mean, I used to sort of think to myself, you could put Bolland on one end and draw a line, you could do McMahon, and you could dot artists along here. And that just doesn't work, because where do you put Aguero? Where do you put...
It's a spider diagram, isn't it?
It's
It's what they often say these things. It's a sliding scale, but it's not, is it? 2000 AD was, it's a melting pot, a spider diagram of art styles. And during that period, Stephen, drawing, to me straight away, I think of like yours is Zenith, and the influences that was around the superhero thing, and then again next to that would be Dread and like Carlos Esquire doing that, or someone else. What was that period like? When you were doing those, was there? I'd just be interested what's behind the scenes.
What's behind the scenes of my
when
style
during that period, like you were doing that. Was there any editorial, or was it quite free flowing of like you're doing this?
I don't remember having any kind of editorial diktat that I had to approach it in a certain way. And my work is quite rooted in the basically the classic work of the sort of 60s and 70s anyway. So maybe it's almost something of an anomaly, the way sort of my work in 2008, because it is kind of quite like Ian Kennedy was one of my big heroes. And well, you could. There's no point in listing them, but it's anyone who is anyone in the 60s and 70s. And usually I was more inclined towards the, I won't say anatomically accurate, but the kind of, that kind of realistic school of cartooning, rather than the more, not exaggeration is the wrong word, but there's a kind of a more abstracted,
a caricature style.
Not caricature maybe. That's doesn't feel right to me to say it's caricature, but
I know what you mean. Well, that's interesting, because I'm interested. So for you, Chris, as well, you've got I'm trying to sort of pick some more obscure ones you guys did as well, because I sort of like for the early 90s we'll get to, like when I think of like Cannon Fodder and for you, Stephen, Maniac 5. And again, sort of you talk about edgy, and one of the things I find, I'll be interested about this, one of the things I find with 2008 is it's not just character designs, it's world building as well. And this is something else I wanted to talk about, and sort of like, so background stuff. And so again, I'll go around and sort of, Jake, you were talking about sort of the early stuff, like some of the world building stuff and the background things you see in his arts. Has there ever been anything that stood out to you, or sort of like how wild something's been? You go, that's right. I've always been amazed by that idea.
It sounds ridiculous that when I don't like to use the word studied comic art stuff like that. It was looking at people like Cam Kennedy and their sort of throwaway lines, the sort of things they kind of like used to like scuff up backgrounds and stuff like that. Regarding sort of like the worlds and stuff like that, where you can't really top someone like McMahon. When you look at artists like that, they're sort of inviting you into their imagination. That's why I love them, is you are entering their world. And so when it comes to world building, you can't top those people. Truly, I don't consider myself a particularly realistic artist or anything like that. But it's something about the sort of unreality of it that I love most of all.
Is that something that
Move
2080? Is that something like I said? I'll go to sort of. I'm gonna go to Simon actually, because you've got your style, the painter style, is fantastic. It's obviously I'm trying. I struggle to describe your work because it's realistic, but there's a color palette to it and sort of. So again, so that idea of world building. Do you approach it in a certain way then?
Yeah, I mean, what I work in on the comics and always have done is it's all in gouache, which is a nice watercolor sort of medium to use. And yeah, I don't know if that's the thing. I always consider myself quite relatively sort of not the greatest fit with 2000 all the time, and it took me a while to find what I was quite good at within, absolutely terrible at anything to do with science fiction, really, really bad. So as I sort of had a few like sort of dread stories and stuff, and it's just really hard going. And sort of when I saw sort of people like Bolland or McMahon and Cam Kennedy doing it, I just thought, God, they're just so effortless at doing it. I have a very literal mind where I try and be realistic, and the dread uniform is impossible to do realistically. If that's going to fit on a human, it just wouldn't. So I've always struggled with that. So I have a huge amount of sort of admiration for anybody who can, I don't consider myself like a comic book artist. I consider myself a comic book illustrator maybe, but I don't have that dynamism about it, which has been a problem. But I sort of seem to have found a way of still being part of 2000 AD universe, but just not doing straight lines anymore and things like that. You can't do it. But yeah, I mean, when I was doing the Slain for a bit, I think it's nearly sort of 10 years ago, which is I find staggering. But yeah, it gave me a chance to look back over all the old Slain artists, and McMahon's stuff is still just astounding. And I just looking at, and I acquired this page quite recently.
Oh Jesus!
Oh, wow! Amazing.
You just look at it. It is just astounding. It looks like it's done on tracing paper as well, which I found quite interesting. But yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And you just look at that and you go, that's somebody who's completely well suited to that character, and that style is completely it's completely authentic. There's no sort of weak panels in it. It's just complete conviction all the way through. It's amazing.
It's amazing sort of communication as well. The way he fits the figure into the actual page, and everything works around it. It's some of the most beautiful layout I've ever seen.
Absolutely brilliant.
Well, that's an interesting point there, again. I want to come back onto your art, because of tone, it sort of comes to this idea of tone, I suppose, as well, and matching artists with a story type. Obviously, 2000 AD, there's a plethora, everything from hard science fiction to fantasy and horror and everything between. And so I will go around the room again, sort of like, if there are artists, you go, they found a niche, like they found their spot. Judge Dredd aside, but like others. So, Stephen, is there anyone that you thought they found their character, or that character sort of like that's how you see it now by that artist?
Well, I've always seen Dredd as Brian Bolland. That's my go-to reference for that. If I ever get to draw Dredd, I go back to the Dark Judges story. And the way I always approach the eagle on Dredd is to not treat it realistically at all. I kind of think of it as being rubber, so it sort of molds itself to each shoulder. It makes it so much easier than trying to make it this kind of metallic hard thing that's sitting on the shoulder there. But yeah, to me, it's in the case of Dredd, it's Bolland. In the case of Slain, as Simon said and Jacob said, it's Mike McMahon. I mean, all respect to Glenn, who kind of did this iconic run on Slane as well. But I always think Mike McMahon made it kind of really quite unworldly. Yeah, yeah. And it's actually so his newer stuff I've seen recently, his covers are staggering. I love them.
Yeah, really brilliant.
Yeah. Just fantastic, like you were saying, pieces of design, sort of shape making.
Yeah, I like the way he kind of like is a chameleon. He kind of changes his style to sort of fit whatever he's doing. He's just an incredible artist.
Yeah, he's one.
I think I'm right in saying the reason he inked those Slane pages on tracing paper was because he hadn't. There was a period he kind of had a sort of lull in work because he was poorly for a while, and I don't know if that the stuff on tracing paper coincides with him coming back to drawing full time again, and he'd lost a bit of confidence with the inking. So he inked it on tracing paper. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Inside baseball there. It's good. Do you think, Chris, this idea of artists and meeting with specific characters of those iconic ones that stand out for you? Any that jump to mind?
Oh, well, I think Isquera with Strontium Dog leaps to mind. I mean, the great thing about Carlos is he was really prolific, and so it's rare to pick up a copy of 2000 AD that didn't have Strontium Dog in it as well as Dread, and I think that run he did on Strontium Dog for so many years, and with the exception of Colin McNeil, I don't think they had a guest artist on it. Obviously, other artists took it over at the end, but that's a pretty amazing run, really, and so consistent as well.
Yeah, I think that consistency always helps with sort of certain characters.
Yeah.
Simon, about yourself, any characters, any from any era, sort of, you think that's the artist that I picture when I think of that character?
Well, I think I sort of naturally have always been drawn to Slane, and what sort of made first, from my point of view, when I first wanted to get into comics, and I'd always painted and stuff when I'd been illustrating and whatnot, and I thought, well, I do like that, and I kind of didn't see how that would fit into 2000 AD. So probably, and it's probably quite obvious as well, because when I first saw Bisley Slane in 89 or whenever that was, I just thought flipping heck it, and I just thought from personally, I just thought, well, this looks like I could have a career in comics if I can just get into it. Then painting is a sustainable sort of way of working. But yeah, Bisley's Slane was just amazing to me.
He's like an atomic bomb dropped on the industry. He changed everything. Truly overnight. First time I saw Bisley, I was just like, this guy has changed all the rules. And he literally changed the comic, because after that, with the possible exception of Steve here, everyone was trying to do Bisley.
We'll come back to that in a second, because it's a note of mine. That's sort of the Bisley sort of bombshell, we'll call it. We'll come back to it because it definitely has a sort of a lead on. Before we do, just want to sort of finish on the question. So, Jake, from your point of view, then, those characters and artists that sort of just gel together, that go together.
For me, and from my sort of like early reading, it's Cam Kennedy and Rogue Trooper. I always kind of put those two together, and Brett Ewins, to be honest, because they were sort of like, they used to sort of cut between the two when I was reading. But I always loved Cam Kennedy, because he made him look like an action man, and his stuff was really, really sort of just graphic, and yeah. So Cam Kennedy.
Yeah, Road Trip is an interesting one because they've got so many sort of great artists that have covered him off, and interesting sort of world to be in. But to go back to something about Simon Bisley, the painted era, and I also recognise it as sort of like, there's this sort of the 90s. It's sort of like, so the Bisley sets it off, and then, if that's how you want to see it, and then it sort of goes into it. And I've got ideas of, like, I've got a few names, because this was sort of, I came into it sort of, like I say, I dabbled as a kid, really came into it. And I remember Simon Bisley, but like the other one is Simon Harrison. Did Bradley and I think it was the Clown and some others.
Robert Bliss.
Robert Bliss did that, yeah.
Robert Bliss, yeah, that's right. And so, but this painted era, was it like Liam Sharp sort of came in and was doing stuff, and
You got Dermot Power,
yeah,
Staples, Carl Critchlow, Nick Percival, Richard Dolan, Will Simpson.
Got amazing recall there.
Someone's
Chris Halls, who went on to become Chris Cunningham. Richard Murray.
Did this sort of like you said, Chris, that this changed the game
Overnight?
Yeah, was it?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm going to say so. Simon, as a sort of an illustrator, as a painting artist, was that, like you said, you mentioned Bisley Slane, but like, did you sort of recognise in the others, or you know, are there any others that sort of like you?
As I recall, I think I saw Bisley's run on the Horn God, and previous to Bisley, Fabry had been doing his black and white stuff, and then after Horn God came the Demon Killer, which was Glenn doing fully painted stuff, which was really, well, I found it absolutely incredible. So Glenn was sort of kind of upping his already astoundingly brilliant game into this painted realm, and I just thought his stuff on that was amazing. So yeah, I was kind of on that wave of fully painted stuff, but hopefully not on the muscly wave, if there's a wave called a muscly wave, but that sort of thing. So I was kind of in that, but not completely with it. And there was some really good stuff, like, you know, Dermot stuff, and I think Greg Staples had been around for a while, hadn't he, already? And he's a really good painter. So some of them you could say, oh yeah, they're really good painters. So to say that they were all sort of riding on that wave was sort of them doing them a disservice, because those artists are, you know, really good, and they were always going to get work. But there was quite a few who were quite clearly just sort of making hay while the sun shined, really.
Yeah. So, talk about the sun shining though, from I don't know, to Chris and Steve, and if you were working at that time, so was that the sea change? Was that like an editorial thing then? Because I do remember, like you say, you listed off that list, and it is like sort of like all of a sudden it's like, oh, this style, and it became very sort of popular. Was it that sort of? Was it notable?
Cats, really. I think just Bisley just showed people a different way of doing things that they possibly haven't thought of before.
Yeah, there was no editorial directive.
No.
The comic had to look like, you know, had to have that change in style. It just sort of happened organically, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was governed by the fact that printing technology had really upped its game as well, and that completely changed everything. I mean, the paper wasn't. I mean, I'm still very fond of the early black and white printing of the early progs. I don't know when it changed over to full color, because some of that stuff was really, you know, the paper quality was pretty poor. But certainly Bisley was able to do that stuff because of technology changing. But I was also, you know, but with looking back at that, I would have been very upset if suddenly the prog had turned into like a full color, fully painted sort of comic, and that, because so much would have been lost if the black and white hadn't been kept, or you know, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and I think I was just sort of testing the water there, because it's interesting, because it didn't obviously, because the variety remains, and I think, like you said, they kept that tone. I think is it Brigand Doom from the 90s, another one sort of was always in black and white, and whenever they did sort of like Thargs, Future Shocks, or sort of like the horror versions, they'd always make sure they were in black and white. So they were always a favourite of mine. Okay, so it was definitely a sea change, but the technology, that's an interesting point, really, then. So let's sort of just think on that then. So the technology obviously introduces colour. Do you think then that again, some of the strips that were there, and I'll go to Jake actually for this one, which initially, some of the strips in this era then, was colour sort of this transition to the ability to do colour, was it a good thing? Was it a benefit, or open the doors?
It certainly sort of changed everything. Never seen anything like it. It completely changed the way I colour. In fact, I can't get out of the habit of sort of trying to do that still, and so it has had a massive impact. And but I still think the fundamental is always black and white, because I think sort of colour is a place you can sort of hide a bit sometimes, and so for me, I've always been a fan more of the black and white. But to say, Bisley, he tore up the rule book. His black and white was astounding as well. ABC Warriors, I don't think you'd seen black and white like that either. The way he used his ink. So, room for all.
Yeah, that's sort of the point. Yeah, that idea of black and white. Then, so you say it's the fundamental sort of. To go back then to Stephen, then so. That use of color then for yours, was there did you change your style then when you knew that this story is going to be in black and white and this one's going to be in color? Does it sort of adjust the way you're approaching that strip?
You mean Zenith?
Well, any of them, when you're just drawing sort of.
I don't remember it being as sort of deliberate as thinking, oh, this has got to be coloured, I'll have to change my style. It perhaps a little bit in the case of the fourth Zenith arc, but by the time we'd finished phase 3 anyway, I kind of felt the need to return to something a bit more, simple is the wrong word, but kind of more rooted in the comics I grew up with. I kind of wanted to sort of take a step back, so the artwork was more open, which kind of lent itself to Gina's colouring. But no, I don't ever remember sitting down and thinking I'm going to have to change my style because of colour.
Okay, it's interesting. So it was always just it's going to be coloured. So just keep doing what we're doing. What about you, Chris? Have you ever considered that when you've done anything? Any ideas of sort of it's going to be coloured or it's going to be in black and white, or lean into a slightly different style?
I think I try to, because if you unless you were colouring your own work, you didn't know who was going to colour it. So I've always tried to make the artwork stand up in its own right in black and white. So no, it doesn't. I just made sure it was as good as it could be in black and white, really. And so if you got a terrible colorist, it couldn't be ruined, really.
Yeah,
you could still read the story.
Yeah, well, I have a question on colorism, not colorists, but coloring styles shortly. Okay, I think that sounds fair. Sort of aiming to do it on your sort of.
I'd probably do less cross hatching if I know it's going to be in color, because you try to suggest shades more in with cross hatching.
Yeah.
I probably have that for the first 5 minutes of them drawing, and then it just turns out all the same anyway, really. I'm not very good at following my own rules.
No, that's cool. So, Jake, from your sort of work, then, have there been occasions when you've adjusted or changed your style for a colorist or two colorists at a different style?
It took me a really, really long time to get how colorists work, to be honest with you. Matt sort of told me you've got to leave your art a little bit more open for the colorist. But I'm a little bit like Chris now. I kind of think if it's really solid black and white, then people, the colorists would do it. And I work with a guy called Jim Boswell pretty much exclusively now, and we sort of have a good kind of shorthand. I leave notes around the page for him, and he saves my neck every week. So.
Cool. One of the things to think about colouring, and this is there's a story in particular that always stands out for me in this, is towards the sort of the mid to late 90s. You talked about technology before, and how it impacted things was the digital colouring that came in. And I often think to Judge Dredd's story, Wilderlands. And there's a whole sort of part of that where it's all digitally coloured, and it's not to be disparaging, but it's varying success in some of the pages. But was, I don't know if anyone goes back, this idea of how colouring is done, sort of, and you mentioned again about the page quality and some of the early stuff. It's on newsprint, it obviously doesn't always, it bleeds or it doesn't look quite right. That introduction of the different type, the technology of colouring, though, is that sort of I actually go to you, Simon, really, from a painting sort of style as well. That's the technology and the colouring things. Is it notable to you as you sort of read 2000 AD?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's hard to judge the sort of the older progs I used to get and sort of collecting old ones sort of retrospectively. I really love how it's the old progs on that sort of loo paper. It just looks it's so evocative and so beautiful that I find it very hard to criticize it. But it becomes a completely different thing when you're looking at your own stuff and how that's printed. I mean, that's very quickly I sort of realised that I can't, it's once I've done the best I can and I've handed it over to a printer, there's not much I can do about it really. And and there's been some stuff which hasn't been ideal, but I'm the only one who knows what it actually looks like, so it doesn't really matter, But yeah, I mean, I think my whole sort of career has been dotted with horrific printing mishaps. But
can I ask, have you ever adjusted your painting style to sort of so it reproduces better?
Not particularly. I mean, I sort of flirted with the idea of going back to Bisley and his Slane stuff, and he painted in acrylics, which is pretty robust. But I just, for some reason, I just can't get on with painting in acrylic. So I chose gouache, which is a sort of like a kind of traditional paint medium. Arnaldo Puzzo used to do all his looking covers in it and stuff, and it's it's fun. It reproduces pretty accurately, pretty fantastically. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those, especially with painted stuff. It is reproduction that isn't ideal. Is just one of those things you just have to put up. It's a lot better now than it used to be. But in the early 90s, it was pretty ropey sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, so go to you, Jake. There is going to the digital thing again. That digital colouring sort of it came in. It was definitely interesting. I'll say that pros and cons to it, but being a fan at the time, was it notable to you?
Yeah, I think the thing about it was it was so new, and the two sort of like old and new, getting them to sort of marry together was just a little bit. It stood out a lot more, But at the time, I work completely digitally, and you can do anything in that realm. So you've got to kind of like make your choice about how you want it to sort of come out. And I think there's nothing more beautiful than trying to make something look natural. And the only reason I draw digitally is because if I were to draw in real life like proper artists do here, I would freeze up, I'd lock up, and it would look really tight and horrible. And all comic art is about an expression and energy and sort of communication, and that's the point of it. And so you've got to experiment with all these different things in to find your voice, and that was all that was.
I think there was a period in digital colouring, possibly in the earlier stages, where a lot of people were a slave to the Photoshop soft brush, which put that awful airbrush bloom on everything.
You have to be shiny.
Sorry?
Everything has to be shiny.
Yeah.
I remember some horrific eagle and pads shine on some of them. I shudder about that.
All the yellows came out as lemon yellow for some reason.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to have an orangey yellow.
It is that sort of thing with just any new thing. You just throw everything at it, and then you realise, oh yeah, no, the beauty of something is its simplicity, and then it's just.
Even Esquerra was one of the first to start digitally colouring his own work, and I thought, oh no, what's he doing? Stop! Go back to hand colouring.
Yeah,
like Bob Dylan going electric.
Yeah. He had those like flying bird pictures, and put like a digital text on them. Like, oh no!
Yeah.
I remember reading an Asterix. One of the later Asterix books, and they computer coloured that, and that was a shit show as well. Why do you do this? But then
they recoloured the Inkle, didn't they? As I say, everything was shiny. Everything had little bubbles of white light on it. No, stop!
That's actually. I'm glad you said, because that was the thing I was sort of in my head. I was hoping someone would mention that, because again, that was the thing of sort of the ability to add texture but not contour, and then to add light, and it adds some unusual shapes to things. That's it's the great sort of maxim of just because you can doesn't mean you should. Yeah, but it sounds like for you guys that obviously the technology's now come along and you're able to do a lot more now. So if you sort of bring it up to today, and Jake, you're saying you work sort of all digital, and so I'm curious about that. So just sort of, is that so no paper? Is that all sort of like from all on screen and
So I use a gizmo called a Cintiq, which is I'm looking at you now on. And it's just a big screen you can draw on. And about as close as I get to paper is that, basically. And the rest just happens in here. So, yeah, I mean, it's just basically so I can work fast and not work tight, basically. And because, it's all editable. And when you can work without mistakes, it's very freeing. You work without fear.
The digital
lot of depth.
Yeah.
Are you never in fear of scratching the screen, though, Jake?
Oh no! Good lord! Good lord! No, they think of stuff like that. It's absolutely fine. You get to wear cool gloves like out of Minority Report, and it's great.
We are living in the future. It's amazing.
We are, yeah. You're going to murder someone next week.
Yeah. You weren't kidding. Yeah, this week's not been good. Yeah.
I always find though that when artists go digital, their work gets tighter. I mean, as they go, and like take Bolland for example, his work has just got increasingly tighter.
I'm a very lazy guy, so it gets looser and sloppier when I do it. But I do know what you mean. But for me, actually, I think I try to leave imperfection in, because I think, that anything that makes it look a little bit more natural, it might be a bit contrived, I admit. But
you use Clip Studio?
Yes, I do. Yeah, yeah. It's brilliant. I loathe Photoshop, to be honest with you, and I hate their sort of monetary policies. So.
But so, Chris, have you sort of tried any? Have you ever, are you still? I was going to say pen and inks, but like, have you used digital?
I'm still drawing traditionally. I can't really show you because I'm not allowed to show what I'm working on. Still traditionally hand drawing and.
Chris, your stuff is so detailed. Can I ask how long it takes you to do a page, just out of interest?
2 to 3 days. Which isn't
bloody hell
great. It doesn't leave me much to live on financially. But then again, I make more money from selling my originals now than my original art than I do from actually drawing the art publication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just go. I mean, I work pretty big. Let me just grab 2000 page.
Whilst he's off, Steve, what about wait for him to come back. Steve, what about yourself? Have you ever sort of dabbled with digital, or is it always are you still pen and ink? Oh, there it is.
Well, I kind of work what I work in a sort of digilog way just recently. Well, actually, not for the last year or so. I kind of went back to just traditional pencils and inks, just out of convenience. But I mean, the last stuff I did for 2000 AD, I was penciling, scanning in the pencils and printing them out in blue, and then inking the blue lines, and then scanning those back in, and then I can sort of change things around and not make corrections, things like that. Little pre-press, bits of pre-press stuff I can do. So I sort of work hard. I've got one foot in either camp. I've never crossed completely into digital, or I haven't yet, because I'm terrified of scratching the screen.
Jake will show you.
I promise you, they think of stuff like that. It's fine. You won't regret. I mean, honestly, I used to work with just a little tablet, sort of looking up and drawing with not looking at my hand. And as soon as I got my Cintiq, it's as close to sort of drawing in real life. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. Although I appreciate I might be not preaching to the converted here.
Leading the way there, Jake. That's what you're doing. You're leading the way. Chris, you had a page. Just want to say. So you.
I was saying something like they draw pretty big. It's nearly A2 size. That's how I get all. That's how I get all the detail
beautiful.
in.
Yeah.
But it also makes it quite a nice, attractive thing for people to buy, really, as well.
I can't afford any of this stuff. It kills me.
No, yeah, I agree. And also space. I did sort of one point suggest up the stairs, and the wife was having none of it. That's interesting. So, I'm actually going to go to Simon for your work. We obviously saw some of the page size that the guys are working on. Are you similar? Is it when you're doing your painted pages? Is it about the same size?
I think it's about 1.5 times up. So that's like that's the sort of size. So
beautiful.
And that's a nice, comfortable size to work at. And I quite like having a product, and I just like painting. I like how paint is. And much like Chris says, it's nice to be able to sell them afterwards as well.
Do you all get to keep your page? I mean, this is an interesting thing because obviously you're working sort of like some analog and on physical and stuff. So you get to keep your pages. I've never understood is that still like a policy? So you guys get to keep your pages and sell them or keep them or do them?
I mean, I think the official thing is Rebellion own the copyright, but we own the artwork, and that's right. That's that. So yeah, I mean, and I have no. I don't keep anything, so I've sold everything. So, and I just not, I'm not attached to it as a thing. So, and it does make up, like Chris was saying, it does make up a bit of money as a nice extra on the end of doing something. So
yeah. No, especially sort of like just seeing a cover you just shown there. I'm actually a really big fan of Thistlebone, so I'm sort of. I was just saying I've got it covered. I've got it here. I was just going through it.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so I'm sort of going through we've obviously gone through to the modern times. So really, one of the things is legacy, and I wanted to sort of touch on this idea, and see how people feel. Sort of like what is it leaving behind, because you've said that you've about a physical item, you're leaving things behind, and you've obviously bought pages of other artists and that sort of thing. Do you guys do you ever think about that, this is the impact I've had, or sort of like I hope someone looks at this in a certain way or anything like that? So again, I'll go from Stephen, sort of, has it ever been a consideration of sort of the impact you've had on 2000 AD or future artists or characters?
Well, as long as someone's enjoyed reading it, then I'm happy with that, frankly.
Yeah, it's that's sort of the primary objective, I suppose, is enjoyment and entertainment. Okay, Chris, what about yourself? Any sort of, have you ever sort of thought about, this is going to be something, or you ever thought about what, that idea of legacy, or in the history of 2000 AD?
Yeah, I do really. I do. It seems a bit vain to think about what you're leaving behind, but it's definitely a consideration. I mean, when I tell people how many hours I put into my work, it's like, do you work in the evening? Yeah. What else am I going to do? I'm going to just sit and watch TV. I've never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones, but I can I've got a bookcase full of books that I've made, and I'd rather have that, really.
That's a good ethically sort of to keep you going.
It's nice to know, someone else might have something that I've made. It's probably a very sort of a way of a pathetic attempt at immortality or something. But I'd rather just. I just can't think of what else I'd rather do with my time. Really, is it a job? I don't think so. I think it's a vocation. What I do, I really can't think of what else I do with my time. Probably go hiking a bit more, but save that for the weekend.
No, that's great. I mean, that's what do they say? If you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. I've worked many days in my life. That's all I can say. Simon, what about yourself? You've said you sort of, you said you sort of feel like you're the illustrator, but you found your fit now with things like Thistlebone and stuff. Do you feel like sitting in the history of 2000 AD?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. I mean, I don't really. I mean, much like Steve, really. I mean, as long as people enjoy it and get something out of it, then that's what my job is, And I was thinking when I was doing the last Thistlebone story, I just, because it really feels like I'm actually painting something that I really, have a lot invested in it, because Tom Eglinton and myself sort of came up with it. And I just thought to myself while I was doing that, I'm painting for a comic I love, and I'm doing a story I love. And I just think, God, this is so, I'm so lucky to be doing this. And I feel so grateful, and it's nice when people like it. And yeah, I mean, I just think, God, I can't think of any better thing than that, really. I'm just really sort of enjoying doing it. And, and it makes me really appreciate 2000 AD as a comic and as an institution. And I've never wanted to do anything else or work for anybody else. I've had the occasional sort of flirtation with some other American comics, and it's just a ball ache. And you're just so straightforward working for 2000. It's just brilliant.
I think, we've talked it through. I think that's we'll sort of wrap it up there. And I just want to say thank you to all of you, really. Twofold. Thank you very much for agreeing to come and do this panel and give me your thoughts and opinions this evening. It's been wonderful. But more so, to all of you, thank you all very much for your contributions to 2000 AD. And I've enjoyed all of your work. I'm stuck in thinking I do have every single one of you on my shelf. So you have achieved that thing of enjoyment and for a fan and everything. So to you guys, I say thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Cheers.
I'll toast you with water.